Good morning, Rabbi Rabotai. We are continuing Al Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Siman Tzadi, Hilchot Tefillah, and we are finishing up Seif Chaf Aleph and Daf Kuf Chaf Gimel Amud Bet. We mentioned that a person should be makpid based on the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, the story of Chizkiyahu HaMelech, that when you daven, there should be no separation between you and between the wall. And then we went through what is considered separation, what's not considered separation, and so on. So now we're still in the middle of the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishna Berura. Says the Mishna Berura in Seif Katan Samech Vav. He brings the halacha from the Taz, something about the shtenders. We spoke about shtenders yesterday. Can you have shtenders? Can you not have shtenders? We brought the Kaf HaChaim that says even those things that halachically, technically are mutar, perhaps it will be a midat chasidut not to do it. But really, the minhag of having shtenders stems from a Taz. The Taz writes, the Taz was the son-in-law of the Bach, right? Taz stands for Turei Zahav. His name really was David, but the Taz is Turei Zahav, and the Bach is Bet Chadash. These are the two Mefarshim really on tour. I believe that the Taz, even though that's printed on Shulchan Aruch, initially he probably authored it on the tour, but then because his father-in-law wrote and printed the thing on tour, so he worked on his Perush on Shulchan Aruch. But nevertheless, he was the head of Vaad Arba Aratzot, the four countries, the Ashkenazi countries. They had the Vaad Arba Aratzot, which basically controlled all of the Yiddishkeit of European Jewry, and he was the head of Vaad Arba Aratzot. Again, without getting into too many details of who he was, the Taz writes, the Kol Davar Shu Sorech Tefillah, anything that is in need of Tefillah, that is enhancing your Tefillah, Afilu gadol harbe, even if it's large. We mentioned small items, not such a problem. When something is larger, the arbat fachim and so on and so forth, it becomes a problem. But says the Taz, Eino chashuv hefsek, is not considered hefsek. If you need to put your sidur on a table in order to be able to daven like a mensch with kavanah, not having to hold your sidur and so on, it's fine. Therefore, says the Taz, the minhag is that you have a private shtender. Every person has a small table, elevated table in front of them. Shekorin stender, that you call shtender, right? Shemanichin alav sidur, that is made to elevate the sidur. Even though that it is 10 tfachim high and 4 tfachim wide, still it's fine. And this is the psak of the rest of the acharonim as well. And now, as we mentioned before, a kli that has 6 tvachim high, and you put it on top of a table or a box or a bed that is another 4 tvachim minimum high, so now together they are 10. Is that considered something with a gova of asarat tvachim or not? The Ben Ish Chai writes that because subtotal of the height is 10 tvachim, is considered a chatzitza, is considered a problem. Now, again, if it's a shtender, then that would be fine according to the Taz, because this is your item of tefillah. It's considered an extension of your sidur. So that's not considered chatzitza, because that's you standing in tefillah in front of Hashem, right? One of the Mir Talmidim that was escaping together with the yeshiva from Europe to Shanghai, when they got on a boat, they went through parts of sea for having they had to escape from one place to another, and part of it was on boat, basically, right? So the Rosh Yeshiva of Shmuel that just passed away a few years ago, in one of his eulogies, Shmuel Birnbaum, one of the Maspidim said when people were going to the boat, right? Everyone had a suitcase. They brought some minimum something with themselves. They couldn't bring a lot of things because it was a rickety boat. The boat was like mamash halfway sinking already. Actually, one of the nisim, in Sichot Musar, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, alav shalom, he writes some kama nisim. He was the mashgiach. I mean, so many nisim happened in their escape from place to place to get to Shanghai. One of them was that this rickety boat that was like half broken, and they went few trips with it to take all the Talmidei Yeshiva, and as soon as they got there, the last delivery, so to speak, they got there and they all emptied out. When the boat went back on the way, it sank. It broke down and sank. Can you imagine? Like Amash Nisi, so they brought like a minimum something. So he brought an stender. Brother Stender. That is a suitcase. That was his suitcase. As he's learning with the Stender on the boat, he preferred to bring something that was part of his learning than any other personal items that other people were bringing, because that was enhancing his. So sometimes Stender is a extension of the mitpalel, the Taz says. So that is not considered necessarily a chatzitza, but nevertheless, the Ben Ish Chai writes, even if you have stender like this one, usually the smaller ones that are the tabletop stenders, right? That are not 10 tfachim by themselves, but then you have a table, and together they are 10 tfachim. It would be considered a chatzitza. Not imagine it's not stender, something else. The combination, subtotal combination of the height is 10 tfachim. The Ben Ish Chai says that is considered already a chatzitza, so you have to be mindful of that as well. Now, the Or Letzion writes, this Taz that we mentioned, that anything that's a sorach tefillah is not considered chatzitza. Chacham Ben Zion Abba Shaul's students write in his name that because the reason for this heter is that this is sorach tefillah, this is considered a need of tefillah, therefore the stender is not chotzes only for a person that is now this tefillah, this Shemona Esrei is actually using the stender for enhancement of his tefillah. But if you are not using it now, even though that normally you use it, but now you're not using it, then it goes back to being a hefsek. So it's sometimes an asset, sometimes a liability. You have to understand whether or not you're actually using the stender for sorech hatfila. Now, says the Mishnah Berura, Lo chashiv hefsek, in Sif Katan Samechet, he's going back on what we learned in the Ramah, that whether or not Ba'alei Chayim are considered hefsek. Before that, the Ramah wrote that if you have something small that is not arba'ah is not dalet tfachim, it's not 4 tfachim wide, is not considered hefsek. So the Pri Chadash cholek. The Pri Chadash says no. Even if it's smaller, still is a hefsek. But you have to understand that Pri Chadash is Geon Achronim. He's one of the most significant names in the list of Achronim. Rabbi Chizkiah de Silva, he was born in Italy, and he was 20 years old when he came to Eretz Yisrael. He became a student with Rab Moshe Galanti's yeshiva. Rab Moshe Maharam Galanti was a student of Maran Shulchan Aruch, and he was officially the first Rishon LeZion. Nowadays, Rishon LeZion, people think it's a political post. Maybe there are some politics involved with it, but Rishon LeZion has been around for 500 years almost. The Glima and the whole thing, and the way it used to be, the Chachmei Yisrael, Chachmei Eretz Yisrael, they would get together and choose the most significant Talmid Chacham as the chief rabbi, so to speak, the Rishon LeZion. So Maharam Galanti, Rabbi Moshe Galanti, was the first of them. He had the yeshiva, and Pri Chadash became a student of his. He unfortunately lived a very short-lived life, but a tremendous personality of Torah. He died in his 30s, but Many hold that wherever Maran Shulchan Aruch does not have a clear psak, you go after Pri Chadash. That's how he's regarded highly in the at least the Sephardi communities, but really all over the world. So Pri Chadash disagrees with this assertion. Pri Chadash holds that even a smaller item still is considered a hefsek. Vechen besefer Mamar Mordechai katav the Midibret Teshuvot Rambam in Teshuvot Rambam in Siman Resh Vav that the Bet Yosef brings. You see that the small items also are considered a problem. Mikol makom safsarim shebet Knesset, but the chairs and the tables of the Bet Knesset lechule alma lo chashiv hefsek. That's not considered hefsek because kivuim. They're considered stationary, even though that you move the chairs here and there, your tables, sometimes you chair. But there's furniture of the shul. The furniture of the shul are considered stationary, they're considered kavua, and therefore they're not considered a hefsek. Now, the Kaf HaChaim writes regarding this that we just discussed right now, whether or not these things are considered hefsek when they're smaller items. The Kaf HaChaim writes that even according to Shulchan Aruch is mashma that things that are smaller is not just Bet Yosef and the Pri Chadash that he brings, the Teshuvot Rambam that he brings, but even from the language of the Maran itself is mashma that smaller items are chotzes, and therefore he says you should be careful, you should be mahmir, that even things that are smaller will be chotzes. For instance, this camera stand that you have, right? It will be the tripod, even though that's not really 4 tefachim or 4 tefachim, but it will be something that's a hefsek, not something that's stationary, and therefore it will be a problem. That's the Kaf HaChaim and his understanding of Marash Charuch. But the Ben Ish Chai does not go with that. Ben Ish Chai is more mekel. He says small things are not chotzes, and therefore you're good to go. Now, we said that we're going to speak about the Baalei Chayim, the animals. The Kaf HaChaim writes that because most poskim they hold that the Baalei Chayim are considered chatzisa, are considered a blockage. Therefore, you should be careful that you should not daven in front of them. Again, for people who have pets at home, that becomes they should ask what pets they should have, they should not have. Halachically, these things are good questions to discuss with a person's Moreh Hora'ah, because it's not so simple halachically to have pets. Some pets is not mutar to have, and other pets are big liabilities, because if you have pets, then you have to feed them first. That's the most basic thing. That a person should be careful with. But then you have, especially because of the maskara of the Gemara in Masechet Bava Metzia Daf Lamed Bet, I believe the maskara of the Gemara seems to be that Sar Baalei Chayim is Isur Deoraita. Inflicting pain on Baalei Chayim is Isur Deoraita. So you have to be very careful. Those who are pet owners, what they can, what they cannot do with pets is something important to explore and know the halachot of. And again, this is not the topic we're going to get into right now, but nevertheless, those who are pet owners, if you're davening at home, you have to be very careful with this, because according to Kaf HaChaim, then you have to be machmir, unlike the Psak of Shulchan Aruch, because most poskim disagree with it, and there are those who feel that this is ta'ut sofer because of lack of sufficient backing in halacha for this position seemingly position of Shulchan Aruch. So it says Seif Chafmed of Shulchan Aruch, we spoke about people, whether people are considered chatzitza or not. You want to daven in a shul, and if you're not in a mizrach front, or you're not sitting by a pole, so you sometimes end up being behind somebody else. Is that considered chatzisa? Is that not considered chatzisa? So we spoke about that briefly. Marash Charuch now speaks about it in Seif Chafbet. Veyesh mi sheomer sheyesh lizaher mileitpalel achorei shum adam. There are those who say, even contrary to what we said before in Shulchan Aruch, there are those who hold that you should be careful not to daven behind another person. V'tov lachosh lidvarav, and it's proper to be careful and try to be stringent and be machmir. This is again the Sefer HaPliyah that Maran brings in Bet Yosef, to which the Chafetz Chaim comments, כתב בספר מאמר מרדכי, לכאורה יש לדקדק בזה, די אפשר להיזהר בזה. Says, how can you be careful in this? Imagine yourself a packed shul with 500 people. Well, you have 500 people stand in the Mizrach. How can you be careful not to stand behind somebody else that's davening? שיהיו כל העם העומדים בבית כנסת נגד הכותל. You're going to have, first of all, it's a good thing to have a wide shul like this, because you have more area in the front to daven, and to be machmir for this Shulchan Aruch that we had. But even there, if you have a packed shul, how in the world are you going to be careful not to stand in front of somebody else and daven? Says the Ma'amar Mordechai. Lachen nireh, therefore he says, De'af la'yesh omrim, even according to this Seif of Shulchan Aruch, the Sefer HaPliyah that Maram brings in Bet Yosef, lo haveh hefsek gamur she'eh asur l'chol adam, it's not considered an isur, it's not considered a real hefsek, but it is zehirut ba'alma. It's something to be careful, l'chatchila, mitzvah min ha'muvchar, shesh tizaher b'dei efshar. When it's possible, you'll be careful. U'bet knesset v'chayoseh bo dei efshar b'inyan acher. In a bet knesset, it's packed on Shabbat, that you can't do in any other way. Pshita de mutar l'chatchila. Then, even l'chatchila, it's mutar l'itparel achorei adam. To daven behind somebody else is fine. Ela shemedaktek b'maasav, someone that's really careful in their halachot. Mitzvah min ha'muvchar is good to be careful to stand in front of the wall actually and daven, and that your makom kavua should be neged hakotel ad kan leshono. So starting this week, we're going to have a fee for standing in front of the wall. We're going to auction it on a monthly basis. Who's going to get to stand in front of the kotel to daven? But that's really a mitzvah min ha'muvchar. So says the Ma'amar Mordechai, even though that from the language of the Shulchan Aruch seems to be that you have to be careful not to do it, it's not isur. It's a mitzvah min ha'muvchar when possible. When it's not possible, even lechatchila, a person could be machmir, could be mekel rather lenient, and you don't have to make life harder than it is. Now, in Batei Knesset that you have, or yeshivot nowadays, that you have all the rebbeim, rashi yeshivot, that's the only people who sit in the mizrach. Right? Nobody else sits in the Mizrach. Nobody else sits in the front row of the Bet Knesset. Some of the shuls have it also. They have shuls that the Rabbanim daven in it. So we have here the Rabbanim who are in the shul involved. They sit in front row. But if you would have more Rabbanim, there will be more people sitting in the front row. And some shuls, they have the entire front row taken for Kavod Torah, that the Rabbanim should be sitting in a special place. So in those types of Batei Knesset, there are those who say that you should not, as a regular person, it's presumptuous to go stand in front of the Mizrach, even though that you're trying to be mahmir an halacha, but the Torah comes with a certain perfection. A perfection of midot is part of it as well. If it looks presumptuous, if it looks not arrogant, so to speak, to stand in front of the wall, because in that Bet Knesset or in that Bet Midrash, only the Rabbanim stand in front of the first line of in front of the kotel, in front of the wall, then perhaps it's not kedai to be machmir, because it's a chumrah that's coming with a kula. So it's a chumrah at the expense of a person's midot. When he looks presumptuous, when he looks arrogant, is not kedai necessarily to do that. That's something to be mindful of as well. And B'ezrat Hashem, we'll talk about the dress code and also things that are in front of the wall. You have pictures on the wall, especially when you go to a Shiva house. Sometimes they have mirrors, sometimes they have paintings that are on the wall. I have been at shuls that they have paintings on the wall. Now sometimes the paintings are not bolet, are not they don't have a thickness to them. It's just a paint on the wall. Sometimes you have actually things that are handiworks of embroidery and so on and so forth. Or sometimes you have the parochet itself. You have parochet and you have pictures of sometimes lions on it, which by itself is a whole question. If you can have that, you can't have that. Can you daven in front of those embroidered images or pictures on the wall? Some Sephardi shuls have, let's say, carpets, silk carpets that are made for design, not for putting underneath you, by hanging on the wall, right? They're hanging on the wall. Can you daven in front of images, and you're bowing down towards the Mizrach, but then you have this imagery in front of you? Is that mutar? Is that not mutar? Is going to be the next Seif of Shulchan Aruch, which B'ezrat Hashem will continue in the days to come.